In 2003, astronaut Buzz Aldrin opined, "History gets reinterpreted as time goes on. Many times, the participants are lost in the retelling of the story." In this location here in northern Hampshire, the participants have been lost. They are not people, but rather the ancient trees that once lived here. In retelling of the logging history of northern Hampshire, we forget, and perhaps ignore the fact that an ancient ecosystem, 12,000 years in the making, once thrived here. Beginning in the late 1800s, the logging industry infiltrated northern Hampshire and devastated this ecosystem in a period of about 80 years. By the 1940s, nearly 100% of the 2 million acres of original forest was harvested to create a myriad of wood and paper products that were in demand at the time. And then, with no more trees to harvest, the logging industry vanished. One might ask, so we cut down all the trees in a 12,000-year-old ecosystem. What does that mean? Why should I care given that the forest grew back? And how does that apply to me today? In this first volume, Nature's 12,000-year-old work in progress interrupted, these essential questions will be answered. At the conclusion of all 7 volumes of the docuseries, the expected result is for visitors to have a deeper respect for the forest of northern Hampshire, and to also understand that not all of the world's natural resources have the ability to regenerate, like the young forest that is now growing here in northern Hampshire. The history of the logging era that is captured in books and revealed in pictures, on the surface is seemingly not applicable to us today. Yet the events are indeed highly relevant. If we listen closely to the story of the forest and digest the imagery, one will undoubtedly ponder the fate of other world natural resources. Then the all-consuming question appears. What are the implications to humans, and how will we lead our lives in the coming decades with dwindling natural resources? For the younger audience, relevance is more tangible, as they will likely live through a period of history when change was constant, everywhere, and even invasive. It is hopeful that the youngest of us will look toward the future with an inquisitive mind, and plan for their future in ways that are more pensive and with a greater sense of personal direction and initiative, yet still make time for a peaceful hike in the mountains. The story the forest wants to tell begins in this seemingly unusual field located within the Pemigewasset Wilderness, but it could be anywhere in the nearly 2 million acres of the North Country. This is Camp 8 of what once was the East Branch and Lincoln Railroad. The site is an easy, flat walk about 1.4 miles from the Lincoln Woods parking area, just off the Kancamagus Highway. It follows the railroad bed, where the wooden ties are still visible from the time they were installed in the late 1890s. Right here, if one listens closely, sounds of the past echo across the mountain valleys. Logging camps are being constructed. A Baldwin steam locomotive is blowing its whistle as it passes over the rails heading to the mill. Stone is being shaped by an artisan with a chisel to be used for dam and trestle foundations and other structures. Deep in the woods during winter, axes would be used to cut into the trunks of the ancient trees, and the unmistakable sound of crosscut saws was also ever present. The cracking of trees falling could be heard all day long. Amidst all this, horses could be heard neighing through the recently cleared forest as they pull a sled loaded with the lumberman's bounty. Camp 8, like the other camps of the East Branch and Lincoln Railroad, provided housing for men that participated in the lumber operations for the 55 years this railroad was in existence. Collectively, these men harvested nearly every single tree surrounding the 72-mile rail system. In the end, 1 billion board feet of wood was pulled from this forest to meet the lumber and paper needs of the era, and this was just one operation. Of note is the year 1948, which is the terminus of Woods operations for the East Branch and Lincoln Railroad. This scene depicts one of the last working trains just before the business ceased operations. Simply put, there was a discrete end to the business at the same time the forest resources were depleted, and that is the foundation of the teachable moment that is revealed throughout the docuseries relative to the world's natural resources. When natural resources are depleted, it affects how we live. The East Branch and Lincoln Railroad was one of at least 17 major logging railroads that interrupted the 12,000-year-old ecosystem of northern Hampshire. This period began around 1870 and roughly ended in 1948 with the closing of the East Branch and Lincoln Railroad. The story of how and why these operations were able to liquidate nearly the entire 2 million acres of northern New Hampshire forest without constraint is most fascinating and applicable today, especially in light of the fact that all the logging companies disappeared once resources were depleted. This story of us is currently repeating itself with other natural resources, and many are on the same trajectory, eventual depletion. Sooner rather than later, meaning decades, the participants of these other natural resources will eventually and undoubtedly be lost in the retelling of their own story, and there will be an impact to us along the way. The warning light for the world's natural resources has been activated. The logging era around 1900, fortunately, is rich with imagery, commentary, and other written material that allows us today to experience how the depletion of a natural resource, in this case a forest, impacted an entire ecosystem and the people that live there. The specific location chosen in northern New Hampshire to illuminate this cause and effect is majestic King Ravine, which is located on the north side of Mounts Adams and Madison in the Presidential Range. Traveling back in time some 12,000 years ago, we can envision that a massive glacier covered, sculpted, and transformed King Ravine into what we see today. However, it was rapidly melting and in a process of retreating as the climate warmed. We can use our mind's eye and imagine massive amounts of water flowing down into the ravine floor. Rivers and brooks, too, were appearing as the glacier yielded its icy grip on the land. For the first time in some 2.6 million years, rain outpaced snow. In the centuries that followed, a new and rugged landscape emerged, ready for colonization by the next post-glacier ecosystem. Over the course of time, the rocky landscape was slowly covered once again with a primitive layer of organic soil from the decay of lichens and mosses. As conditions became advantageous for more complex plant life, grasses and primitive plants would ultimately move north and appear in the valleys. Eventually, the soil would accumulate and slowly move into the higher elevations to support the growth of trees, similar to what we see today. Over millennia, the fledgling forest grew, evolved, and eventually cloaked the White Mountains of New Hampshire in a magnificent northern hardwood forest at the lower elevations. Higher up, the forest transitions to a mix of both hardwoods and conifers. At elevations above 2,700 feet, the forest is primarily dominated by spruce and balsam fir, eventually fading into cromults just before the alpine zone above 4,400 feet in elevation. Up close, this new primeval forest is nature's work of art that has grown and evolved for thousands of years. Today, King Ravine is one of the more spectacular visual settings in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It is characterized by steep rock walls and a floor consisting of massive boulders that were sheared away from the higher elevations and then transported to the base of the ravine by the glacier. Looking at it today, the forest cloaks the entire glaciated valley except for the massive rock ledges and boulder fields. It is a favorite for people looking for that exceptional and unique mountain experience one can find in the ravines of the Presidential Range. Given the rocky terrain and inaccessibility, it is surprising that much of the forest in and around King Ravine is not original. Just like the rest of the forest in northern New Hampshire, the touch of humanity here has been heavy and harsh. This unusual gray patch of land below Mounts Madison and Adams, around the year 1900, just begins to hint at what heavy and harsh will mean for this original and spectacular forest. King Ravine serves as a most telling and descriptive proxy for understanding how and why only a few thousand acres of forest in northern New Hampshire is original. King Ravine was named after Thomas Starr King, who wrote The White Hills, Their Legends, Landscape, and Poetry in 1859. The literary work is a tribute to the beauty and majesty of the White Mountains and reveals a deep appreciation for the power and wonder of nature, especially in King Ravine. Thomas Starr King was one of the early visitors to this exceptional location. In his 1859 book, he described his experience there in both word and illustration. One expression of his travels, along with sketches from his book, is presented as follows.
If any of your readers have ever driven from Gorham to Jefferson on what is called the Cherry Mountain Road to the Notch, They have noticed the ravine of Mount Adams, which is cut to the very heart and up to the throat of the noble mountain. Seen from the road below, it is the most spacious and the grandest of all the gorges that have been cloven out of the White Hills. It is of an excursion up the tilted floor of this granite gulf that I sit down to write you now. How often, in riding along the road in Randolph, where its lines of lifted forest subside into the verdure of the valley, have I looked with longing up to its sheer and sharp-edged walls, and farther up to its smooth-faced ledges blazing like mirrors with sunshine upon their moisture, up to cascades that shook feathery silver over dwindled precipices, up to the curving rampart that unites the two sides of the chasm and supports the mountain's rocky spire. There, I have said to myself, the very spirit of the hills is concentrated. There the wildness, freshness, and majesty which carriage roads and hurrying feet and tip-top houses are driving or disenchanting from Mount Washington are as undisturbed as when the Indians warned the daring pioneers of civilization from ascending Agiachuk, on peril of the Great Spirit's wrath.
Mossy Fall, in the floor of King Ravine, is a favorite destination for hikers to stop and admire the beautiful natural scenery. However, this amazing forest today is in a state of recovery from a massive fire in 1886. While working hard to regrow and reestablish itself after the blaze, the young forest stood oblivious to yet another impending disaster that was just gaining momentum in 1902, just 16 years after the fire, and would be far more devastating in scope. But first, a brief trip back in time is in order. Using historical documents and images, it is possible to experience the Great Fire in King Ravine on July 14, 1886. On this day, a small fire likely started as a result of hikers having lunch. Eventually, it grew into a full-blown forest fire. At the time, it was described as increasing fearfully within an hour of the first visible thin line of smoke. In time, flames could be seen
leaping and swaying under the blast of wind, driving, as usual, up the ravine as through a flue, and meeting above the strong east wind. These conflicting currents made an eddy which soon filled the ravine with smoke, so that we could no longer judge of the fire's progress, except by the increasing volume of deep, yellow, angry-looking smoke that poured up the great chimney and rolled westward, and by the occasional bursts of flame which showed that the fire had climbed Durand Ridge and was eating, I may say gobbling, its way into the wind and towards us. For half an hour it was fearful to watch. The power and speed were so, to all appearances, irresistible.
This account of the fire, as it raged in King Ravine, was provided by the same person who witnessed the birth and rapid growth of the fire. To her own admission, she was likely the cause. The result of having lunch alongside a warm and comforting fire near Mossy Fall. For those who know King Ravine well, imagine the sight she described after the fire.
It is an ugly piece of work as it stands. The ravine is burnt from side to side, all the way from the lowest boulders just beyond Mossy Fall, up to the open place where we lunched together. Black, naked, contorted trees, the earth so burnt that the path was often hard to trace. The floor proper is only partially injured, the center being untouched. Nowell Ridge is intact, but Durand Ridge is badly burnt. The fire ran up the gullies from the Gateway Gully exclusive, all the way along the side, including a broad tract of the dense spruce forest. The beautiful mossy path through the lower boulders is, I fear for me, spoiled for age.
From afar, the damage to the forest in King Ravine could be easily seen years after the fire. Within the forest proper, the airline trail higher up on Durand Ridge traversed the burned area. While this blaze was the result of human activity, it illustrates just how quickly a small fire can spread in the mountains. A notice of caution for us today. Forest fires, as witnessed in King Ravine, cause significant and long-lasting damage to the forest ecosystem, and can fundamentally change it, as depicted in this contrasting landscape of a 2017 forest fire in Kinsman Notch. For this reason, the level of forest fire danger in the mountains is constantly updated. Looking at King Ravine today, as one explores the area, the change in forest species caused by the fire can be seen. The head wall and east side wall are dominated by a deciduous forest. which shows where the fires raged. Much of the west side wall, however, is still deeply cloaked in a coniferous forest that escaped the 1886 fire, as revealed by the witness. Returning back to 1902, we see several men in the floor of King Ravine. This location is just beyond Mossy Fall. The man standing is pointing toward the ravine itself, while the other men eagerly listen to him. One can only imagine what they were discussing at the time. Perhaps they were looking into the ravine, admiring the steep trail up the head wall. Or it is possible they were noting the fire scars from 1886. The bleached bones of the trees, as they were called, would still be plainly visible many years after the fire. While these men were enjoying their hike in King Ravine, an ominous article appeared in the New York Times. The edition is August 27, 1902. On the front page, lower right corner, a title quickly captures one's attention.
The most important sale of timberland in the White Mountains since the purchase of the Coe and Pingree lands, including the slopes of Mount Washington by the Bartlett Lumber Company, has just been effected. All the timberland owned by the Browns Lumber Company of Whitefield has been sold to the Berlin Timberland Company, which is understood to be the Berlin Mills Company, operating under a separate name. The land in question includes portions of the town of Carroll, Jefferson, and Randolph, together with Low and Burbanks Grant, which embraces the northern slopes of Mounts Adams and Madison and much of Jefferson. The price paid is reported to be about $600,000. It is estimated that there are 400,000 cords of pulpwood on the tract.
In today's money, that is more than $22 million and reveals the significant size of the investment at the time. The total area was described as being 12 miles long and 4 miles wide, or about 31,000 acres. Indeed, it was a substantial amount of original forest that Thomas Starr King was able to describe with word and imagery as depicted earlier. The article, given the content, likely caused an uproar across New Hampshire. For just 1 month after the New York Times article appeared, the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests convened at the Eagle Hotel in Concord on September 26, 1902. The purpose, in part, was to discuss the fate of this amazing forest around the northern presidential range. An account of this meeting is recorded in the annual report of the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests, 1901-1902. It states,
"The Berlin Timberland Company has purchased the Great Virgin Forest on the northern slopes of the Presidential Range and has begun operations. The camps and the logging railroad, with a large force of choppers, are now in operation."
Several important addresses were made during that meeting. One to which most careful attention was given was that of Mr. Orton B. Brown, general manager and one of the proprietors of the Berlin Timberland Company. He delivered a most chilling message if you were a tree standing in the forests of the northern presidential range in 1902.
As to the tract on the north slope of the presidential range, it was purchased by Berlin Timberland Company, in which we are interested. We purchased it because we needed the timber in our business. The preceding winter was an unfavorable season for getting out logs and made it necessary to secure a supply near at hand. We hesitated to buy this tract because we knew there were many who would have a strong feeling about our cutting it. But there is a scarcity of timber all across the country, and it is necessary to have the logs in order to keep the mills running. Having purchased it, we intend to cut it, beginning the coming winter. It is not our purpose, however, to cut the entire tract this winter. This will probably require a number of years before the entire tract is cut over. There are parts of it which have great scenic value, which we will sell if a purchaser can be found who will pay us what we can get out of it. Our company is interested in preserving the scenic beauty of the state and will continue to contribute towards it, but cannot alone afford to maintain this tract as a park.
In Mr. Brown's address, the word afford was used. As a business owner today, one can understand the need to maximize the investment opportunity and quickly. Mr. Brown's statement also reflects a time in the history of the country when high-quality timber was in great demand. In the White Mountain Echo of July 21, 1906, several references were made to the increasing value of the land. First, it states that a rise of more than 50% has occurred during the decade, and prices are likely to still go higher. Most notably, the article references a report from the United States Forest Service, which stated that northern New Hampshire had, at the time, 4,764,000,000 feet board measure of standing coniferous timber. And without importations from Canada and elsewhere, this supply would last 21 years. Not only was it known that the forest would one day be depleted, it was actually quantified and given a value, 21 years. Yet harvesting continued as if the forest supply was infinite. The Berlin Timberland Company showed no restraint and maximized the business opportunity as promised. However, in doing so, it guaranteed that the forest resource would one day be depleted. And once the forest was fully harvested, the business had no choice but to remove the railroad, vacate the logging camps, and cease operations on that site. Deep in the northern presidential forest in 1902, removal of the trees proceeded with the efficiency offered by modern harvesting practices of the day. During the warmer months, logging roads were constructed, bridges built, and logs were used to level the roads and fill in the mud areas. Harvesting operations consisted of 8 logging camps, such as this one under construction in Bumpus Basin. During the winter, 400 men across the tract were busy clear-cutting the forest to an elevation of 4,000 feet. 2 additional camps were eventually added in the vicinity of the valleyway towards the end of operations. If one were standing inside King Ravine proper in 1903, clear-cutting would be clearly evident. Notably in the distance, whole mountains had already been cleared of their primeval forests. At the entrance to King Ravine, a logging road would be visible. Higher up the east wall, clear-cutting is evident. James Pray, Appalachian Mountain Club counselor for improvements, provided a written encounter of the forest he witnessed in 1902.
Mount Bowman will have been denuded entirely, and the appearance of Mount Jefferson is sorely injured. The castellated ridge path was so blocked up that it seemed best not to attempt it to clear it.
This map in August of 1905 shows the extent of logging referenced by Mr. Pray. The shaded areas reveal that the valleys of both King and Castle ravines had been severely cut over. A hike up the Valleyway Trail would have shown the aftermath of timber harvesting on a personal level. The third annual report of the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests on page 13 describes the scene.
Meantime, the choicest forests in the mountains on the Presidential Range are rapidly disappearing. The Randolph Forest, that 3 years ago was probably the most beautiful primeval forest in all New England, has had 400 men cutting in it for 3 winters. It is now 3/4 gone. 1 more winter's work will finish it. On the higher slopes, the cutting has been clean, leaving prominent and ugly scars on the mountain sides.
A quote from Appalachian Mountain Club counselor Harlan Perkins, looking at the Northern Presidentials on July 9, 1906, provides further witness to the aftermath of harvesting operations when they were nearly complete.
At no time in the past decade has the encroachment of the lumbermen seemed so threatening to the club's interests. On the northern peaks, as if it were the final gasp of the expiring demon, standing timber so remote and inaccessible as to be considered perfectly safe is being cut with ruthless hand, while paths whose integrity had practically been guaranteed are being cut over in a most crude and wasteful manner.
It was not until 1910, with the formation of the Randolph Mountain Club, that work could commence in the forest of the Northern Presidential Range to restore the trails. This group is at Grey Knob in 1912, and one can only assume they played a significant role towards this effort. Looking at the Northern Presidential Range shortly after harvesting, one would have seen a forest in recovery. Gone is the original forest, replaced by the one we see today that in this image has just begun to grow. Note the general absence of conifers in what is mostly a deciduous forest. The images of the forest fire in 1886 and the harvesting operations in King Ravine that began in 1902 illuminate the plight of the forest in this small tract of land. However, the forest is in the process of regeneration, and a walk along the trails leading to King Ravine today showcase this new forest ecosystem. Notably absent, however, is any sign of the logging industry. The 10 camps that were once home to hundreds of men disappeared long ago, having been absorbed by the same force that was once conquered by the logging crews. The disregard for sustainability, coupled with maximizing profits, all but guaranteed the extinction of both the forest and the logging industry at the same time. And that was the consequence of short-term thinking. The story of King Ravine has now been told in this new light, and hopefully the participants of the forest, the original trees, will never be lost in the retelling of the 1886 fire or the logging operations that commenced in 1902. Across northern New Hampshire in the early 1900s, similar disregard for the forest of King Ravine was being repeated. No mountain or forest was off limits. From one vantage point, the lumber operators needed raw material from the land they owned to meet their business objectives. From the perspective of visitors to the region and the burgeoning vacation industry, denuded mountains, fires, and logging camps posed a direct threat to their goals and ambitions. The result was a conflict of interest that required that the New Hampshire state legislature intervene. But was it too late for the original forest? On February 24, 1903, the state of New Hampshire approved the following resolution.
Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives in General Court convened, that the Forestry Commission be and hereby is authorized and directed to procure, upon terms to be approved by the Governor and Council, a general examination of the forest lands of the White Mountain region by employees of the Bureau of Forestry in the Department of Agriculture at Washington, whose report shall be laid before the next session of the General Court.
3 months later, the examination began in earnest. On March 31, 1905, a final report prepared by the United States Bureau of Forestry titled Forest Conditions of Northern New Hampshire was received by the United States Department of Agriculture. The person leading the Bureau, Gifford Pinchot, was the agency's first chief and is credited with tripling the nation's forest reserves and protecting their long-term health for conservation as well as recreational use. The land area examined consisted of 1,951,977 acres, or 32% of the entire state of New Hampshire. Of this amount, just over 86% was classified as forest land, and more than half of this area was owned primarily by large lumber and pulp companies. Of the total forest land at the time of the report in 1905, 81% was classified as either cut over or cold land. Just 200,000 acres, or 12%, was original forest and primarily located in the White Mountains. In light of this fact, the question is presented once again. Was it too late for the original forest? At this point in time in 1905, the answer is yes, for 81% of the forest. While the report is, in and of itself, a highly informative document and worth reading in its entirety, it is the forest inspector's comments throughout that are most illustrative and descriptive of the forest conditions of northern New Hampshire, a few of which are shared here to highlight the forest conditions at the time. 1. The upper part of the Wild River Valley was severely burned in the spring of 1903, and but little growth now remains. 2. Regarding the forests of the Ammonoosuc River Basin, there is practically no virgin forest left in this watershed, save a very few isolated patches on the upper slopes. The country has been entirely cut over and subject to severe fires. 3. Along the valley of the Hancock Branch in Lincoln, the forest was completely logged. The state of New Hampshire was increasingly concerned about the fate of its forest as a natural resource. The harvesting practices of the time were unsustainable, the effects upon the environment were devastating, and public outcry was increasing in intensity. The important message is that New Hampshire recognized the inevitable. Natural resources are finite, and approaching complete depletion without foresight, critical thinking, and caution is a lose-lose scenario. And that lesson, one that slowly became evident towards the end of the 1880s, is a lesson that applies to the depletion of other world natural resources that is happening today. It is a relevant indication of future change for humanity. In summary, it took about 80 years to harvest nearly 2 million acres, nearly 100% of original forest cover in northern New Hampshire. In 50, 75, 100 years from now, that same sentence can be written for natural resources such as fossil fuels, aquifers, sand, lithium, and many others. The only difference will be the numeric values. Then what happens to the various industries involved? What happens to us? A major element relative to the story of King Ravine and the surrounding forest is how and why the lumber companies came to own so much land in northern New Hampshire. An account of one land deal in the White Mountains is shared. It would eventually be devastating to the forest and, interestingly, its savior at the same time.
This agreement, made in Boston, Massachusetts, this 27th day of September 1890, by and between the New Hampshire Land Company, a corporation organized under the laws of the state of Connecticut, and George B. James of Boston, Massachusetts, of the first part, and George Van Dyke of Lancaster, New Hampshire, and J. E. Henry and Sons of Zealand, New Hampshire, of the second part, witnesseth that the party of the first part agree to sell their rights, title, and interest in that part of Franconia which is drained.
Understanding this is essential, as parallels can be drawn to events in the modern world, but at a much grander scale. It was March 12, 1867, when veteran Union Army Field Officer Walter Harriman was elected governor of New Hampshire. He, along with the New Hampshire legislature, sold the last state-owned interest in the forest lands. These actions would ultimately have a most profound impact on the forest of northern New Hampshire, the people living there, and how the natural resource would ultimately be preserved. 3 fateful transactions are recorded in the Office of the Secretary of State that initiate the 80-year battle for the forest. Each sale of land was outlined in an address to the New Hampshire Board of Agriculture on February 1891 titled, Our New Hampshire Forests by Joseph B. Walker. For sale. 1. October 17, 1867. An area 6 miles in diameter, approximately 2,000 acres, centered on the tip-top house on the summit of Mount Washington. Sale price, $500. Number 2. October 27, 1867. An area of 70,000 acres in Coos County. Sale price, $20,500. Number 3. November 5th, 1867. An area of 100,000 acres in Grafton, Carroll, and Coos counties. Sale price, $4,000. 1867 set the stage for the final transfer of land ownership from the state of New Hampshire to private individuals and organizations. The state owned no more land after these last transactions, and no laws existed to empower the government to influence or control how landowners treated their forest. The timber barons pounced on the opportunity and seized the raw material for their business ventures. The resources were used to feed a rapidly growing country that was hungry for wood-based products, just as Orton B. Brown said in his address on September 26, 1902. As indicated earlier, Mr. Brown said, in reference to the great forest on the northern presidential range, that his company is interested in preserving the scenic beauty of the state and will continue to contribute towards it, but cannot alone afford to maintain this tract as a park. That sentiment belies a deeper attitude toward the forest as raw material for the lumberman's business ventures. In the 1893 New Hampshire Forestry Commission report, a darker perspective is given, and this time by folks working on behalf of the state of New Hampshire. On page 105, it is written that the lumberman has put money into his enterprise and must get it out again with the most profit he can secure, and that this is the best system for him. He will also say that even if it be not the best in the long run, and for other industrial interests, more or less injuriously affected by it, he is working for himself and for present profit, and not for his neighbors or posterity. When one does not consider posterity, meaning the fate of future generations, what does that say about the relationship one has with their children and grandchildren? Charles Henry of the East Branch and Lincoln Railroad presented a more chilling attitude toward the forest as a natural resource in an essay titled, Should Our Forests Be Preserved? He posed a question. Should our forests be kept standing until they are destroyed by nature? Or should they be used to satisfy the wants and needs of our people in the advancement of progress and prosperity? The notion that nature and the forest are distinct from each other and mutually exclusive reveals a cunning twist on words. Furthermore, should one think that humans should save the forest from the evil clutches of the very force that created it? A dead standing tree, or one that has fallen, is as important to the forest ecosystem as the sapling that has just taken root. If the state of New Hampshire in 1867, and then again in 1893, considered the law of unintended consequences, perhaps the fate of the forests in northern New Hampshire would have been different. Regardless, the perspective of the lumberman towards natural resources, as written in the late 1800s, remains a driving force of business in modern times relative to posterity. A question is presented. What are the unintended consequences to future generations when natural resources are being consumed as fast as possible today? If the past is a predictor of the future, which it usually is, then it is prudent to answer that question now and respond accordingly. In 8 decades, the original forest of northern New Hampshire, as a distinct and finite natural resource, all but vanished as a result of people who did not contemplate the full spectrum of possible outcomes relative to the decisions that were being made at the time. The law of unintended consequences was ignored. The lumber industry, as it once was, disappeared along with the forest, despite the warning light being activated. Today, the new forest in King Ravine and throughout the mountains in northern New Hampshire is part of the White Mountain National Forest. It was established on May 16, 1918, and is managed by the Forest Service, which is part of the United States Department of Agriculture. As written on their website, the Forest Service manages these public lands to conserve resources through a balance of activities and uses, including wildlife habitat, wilderness, recreation, clean water, timber, and forest products. Each national forest is part of the larger national forest system that includes more than 150 forests from Alaska to Puerto Rico. Each is yours to enjoy. The White Mountain National Forest covers more than 800,000 acres across New Hampshire and western Maine. It attracts 6 million visitors every year. Its mountainous terrain offers people year-round opportunities to relax in its 23 campgrounds, hike along 1,200 miles of trails, ski, cycle along the many quiet backroads, and enjoy 4,750 miles of streams, brooks, and rivers, and its 67 lakes. We thank the White Mountain National Forest for all that it does for us in the forest each and every day, all year long. Despite the liquidation of the original forest, a reasonable and sustainable balance today has been achieved between the forest and humans. The people responsible for maintaining that balance are today's foresters and silviculturists, who are delighted and eager to share their knowledge with us. In the coming volumes of the White Mountain National Forest, An Ecosystem in Recovery, David Gavatsky, who is a forester, will periodically share his knowledge and experience to broaden and fortify the learning opportunities throughout the docuseries. He worked for the United States Forest Service for 33 years and is also a naturalist, author, and expert in old-growth forests. He will serve as a teacher and guide for these educational segments. Let's meet David now at Snyder Brook as he engages us in a most informative learning experience to complement the story of King Ravine.
Okay, we are recording. David,
hey.
As always, it's great to see you again here in the mountains, in the woods.
Yeah.
And we're, what are we, about 14, 15 degrees this morning?
I think it's actually warmed up to a balmy 19 degrees.
Was it 19, huh?
Yeah, but the wind chill is probably around 5 degrees. But we're in a really special place. This is the Snyder Brook Scenic Area. Original forest. It's in the White Mountain National Forest in the town of Randolph. Very easy walk up from Route 2 Appalachia Crossing. And we're standing amongst a forest that has never been cut, never been logged over, and these are really quite rare in New Hampshire, certainly, and many other parts of the country too. But this history is just quite fascinating. In 1895, Mr. Watson, who was the proprietor of the Ravine House, was about to log this area, and the people that were staying at this Ravine House Hotel were members of the Appalachian Mountain Club. Now, the Randolph Mountain Club hadn't been formed yet, but the AMC members were there, and they were listening to him, and this is one of their favorite areas. because there's several beautiful waterfalls in here. And of
Right,
course,
right.
these towering hemlock and spruce and maple and beech and yellow birch that are in here, they were a bit horrified by that.
And the big tooth.
And the big tooth aspen.
We just saw two of them.
Yeah. Some people call it big ass tooth, and for obvious reasons, but pretty. That's one of my top 5 trees, by the way. I think it's number 5. Sugar maple, of course, is first
On David's list.
On my list. But so they got together and they said, "Well, how much, do you want to sell it for, Mr. Watson?" And he said $400. And of course, this was 1895. The Appalachian Mountain Club at the time didn't have a lot of money, and so they just raised the funds themselves.
Wow.
And were able to buy it. It's a strip 600 feet wide by a half mile long, up along Snyder Brook.
36 acres, is that right?
Yeah, it was 33 acres at the time, and then they bought an additional 3 acres. So yeah, we'll call it
36?
36 acres.
And right behind you, so we have to be careful, is the brook itself, and we'll get a couple shots here. There's just giant ice falls sitting on top of the brook right now.
Right. This is Gordon Falls, and Gordon was one of the original trail builders here in the White Mountains and lived in Randolph. So that's where that name came from.
So he and Lowe's probably knew each other?
Yeah, they were all good buddies. So there were
buddies.
quite a few trail builders in the White Mountains, because many of these people, in addition to building trails, they were guides, and they charged people to guide them up the mountain. And so here they had their trails to take them up.
And we'll talk, because we're looking right over there, and just on the other side of that hill is the secondary forest. We'll talk a little bit about, because we're going to reset over there, and everybody can have a chance to see the difference of what this old forest looks like versus secondary.
Some people call this primary forest or original forest or ancient, different names, and that's second growth. So we usually call that secondary forest. Yeah, it's been cut not once but twice.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that.
There's been two levels of cutting in there. So we'll see the difference. And as we go through as we get to the edge, the type change from this mostly coniferous forest into almost a solid deciduous forest is really quite dramatic.
Yeah.
So it's a very tight type change.
12 inches, 14 inches in diameter.
Yeah,
is about the max?
10 inch, 12 inch diameter trees. And in here, there's many trees that are 30 inches in diameter. And if you look at this forest around here, you say, well, this is awfully messy. But that's the whole thing. There's lots of dead and dying trees that are on the ground or even standing up. We call them snags or wildlife trees. But that actually is very good for wildlife, very good for storing carbon and so forth. And it's just a beautiful trail to walk. We're on the Fallsway trail, and easy trail goes up about 300 or 400 feet in elevation.
I was about to say. So folks, if you come up here, take this right up. The valleyway is right over there. And then you can take a trail coming back on the other side of this. And,
the Valleyway was actually one of the big logging roads, and I'm sure you've got some pictures of that.
I think it's on your side. We'll put a picture of the Valleyway being logged with actually a view toward the east shoulder of Adams.
Yep.
But yeah, this is one of my favorite places to come on a whether it's a summer day or whatever.
Yeah,
again,
and I'm glad we're
walk.
here on the last day of the year. This is New Year's Eve day.
Yes.
So to start off, end the year on a really nice, bright note, and to be thinking about the next year. So to go along with the history, I just wanted to mention one other thing. In 1937, the Appalachian Mountain Club, this is during the Great Depression, the National Forest had acquired much of the surrounding land after it had been cut over in 1914. But this tract of 36 acres was owned by the Appalachian Mountain Club, and they decided that they would turn it over to the White Mountain National Forest, to the people, and for the Forest Service to manage it. And they did that in 1937.
Okay.
And in 1961, we have a land management category called scenic area, and there's 10 of them here in the White Mountains, and this became one of them in 1961 on the 50th anniversary of the Weeks Act, without getting into too much detail. So it's kind of a shrine for conservation. And if I had to say one thing about this area, this is important, not just in New Hampshire, not just in the White Mountains, but regionally, because this was the first land conservation in the White Mountains in 1895. 1895.
When that was the heart of the logging industry everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah, I mean, virtually probably 90+% of this mountainside in the northern presidentials were cut over.
Yeah, and we'll look at that. So the statistics that have been provided in the various articles, the one that I saw was described as 12 miles long that way.
Yep.
And 4 miles wide.
Yep.
All cut.
Yeah, all cut.
All logged.
Yep.
And that translates, when they sold it back in 1914, that was just over 30,000 acres.
Yes.
So to put it in perspective, we've got 36 acres of original forest out of 30 plus thousand.
Sure.
Pretty remarkable. And I think for me, it puts it into perspective just how much of the forest was actually logged everywhere.
Right.
Not just here, but everywhere.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things, this 30,000 acre area was the second tract acquired for the White Mountain National Forest.
Oh, okay.
So the first one was down in near Mount Moosilauke, the Benton area. That's the first. This was the second a few weeks later.
The Glencliff Trail.
Yeah, the Glencliff Trail, where there's some wonderful old growth along that.
Really nice. Before you get into the conifer forest, if folks go up there, fairly easy climb. And we'll get video in there at some point.
Let's go. I gotta go back and see that area.
Well, whenever you're ready to go.
All right.
At some point here, we're going to do the entire old growth and really dive into that. So anyway, this is a very special place, and as you walk further up, the trees get a little bit bigger. There's again primarily these hemlock, and then there's
eastern hemlock,
big red spruce up here as well.
Yes, there's even some balsam fir that it's hard to tell they're balsam fir because they're over 2 feet in diameter.
Wow.
Yeah, just amazing that they get to be that big because this is original old growth forest.
And this is a treat, winter or summer. In fall, it's primary conifer, so it looks like this without the snow. But anyway, so
it's great in spring because of all the waterfalls here.
The waterfalls.
And there's a busy trail, as you said, the Valleyway, that gets most of the use because people are seeking the peak, going to Madison Springs Hut. That's where they're staying, and this parallels it, but in this cool forest where there's very few people that use this trail, but there's wonderful things to see.
And two options, we said you can go up and then come back down the other side.
Yeah, the brook banks are the other side.
Brook bank, right?
Yep.
Or you can go up to the end
and
then come down the Valleyway back to the parking lot. So,
Okay. Easy hike. Yeah, although we're wearing, winter clothing. We've got micro spikes on and not enough snow for snowshoeing, but you always want to be prepared here in the mountains.
Although I'm sure when you get up a little further, you got to have your snowshoes.
You got to have your snowshoes,
And for edification, as we're looking down here at the parking lot, up to the summit of Adams, you're looking at a 4,500 foot vertical. So people come in to go hiking. It is a hike.
It is a hike. Yes, the second highest mountain here in the White Mountains, and it's certainly one of the toughest ones to go up, depending on which trail you take.
I think we started right around 1,200, 1,300 feet. 600 feet down here.
Yeah.
And you go up to 5,798 feet, I think is what it is. That's one of my favorite mountains. So
without getting into the details, it's considered a holy mountain because of its shape by the Etherian Society. But we'll save that one for another day.
We do talk a little bit about Starr King, Reverend Starr King.
Reverend Starr King, wrote the book. Yep.
And we'll talk more about King Ravine itself at another time because that's another just spectacular place.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get a few more pictures.
Okay.
And then we'll reset over there so folks can see comparison between this and the subsequent forest.
Okay.
And you hear the wind blowing.
Yeah.
Sound good?
Yeah. Well, there's a term for the wind blowing through the trees. Zitherism.
Zitherism.
Yeah, we'll have to get into that.
Just curious,
it's
did you make that up?
Word. No. Yeah, Zitherism. I mean, it starts with a P, actually. Psithe. Erism. Zitherism.
Zitherism.
Yeah, it's that sound of the wind going through the pines, or in this case, the hemlocks,
With snow on it.
And that
which is a wonderful sound.
I'm waiting for a big clump of snow to go down my back.
or that constant. It won't happen today because it's not windy, but always that crack.
Yeah.
I'm always listening.
Always staying alert.
But folks, if you come up here, take your time and really just slow down and look at the trees and look at this hemlock behind us. It's not huge, but you look at the top of that one on the other side of the river, and it really gives you an idea of the age of these trees.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we'll reset.
We're set.
Perfect. Okay.
All right.
Okay, we're recording.
All right.
And don't walk into the camera.
Don't trip.
Yep. Okay. I'll go over here.
Okay.
Well, because you're at the end.
You can be a bump on a log.
A bump on a log.
Yeah.
All right. So we have now set up, 75 feet away from where we were.
Yeah, just not too far. We're right at the type change. We've left this hemlock, spruce, hardwood mixed forest, and now we're in second growth northern hardwood forest, which is primarily composed of sugar maple, American beech, yellow birch, and there's occasionally some aspen in here, and you just don't see the conifers that we had in the old growth forest, because when they were cut out, the seed source was gone, and so we're just mainly seeing hardwood trees in here.
And it's easy enough the trail's right there, so folks can walk over here 30, 40, 50 feet and be looking into what is traditionally a visual that you would see in any hiking trail here in the White Mountains for the most part, right?
Yeah, this is very, very typical forest here on this lower slope of the White Mountains.
And they were in here, so they were cutting in August of 1902. It was sold to the Berlin Timberland Company.
Yep.
And they started cutting in that winter. So 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it ended in 6.
Yep.
In 1906 is when I think it all ended. And so everything was cut, right? Everything was completely
pretty much
clear-cut.
everything was cut. Pretty high elevation, even in the King Ravine, that area was cut. And it was brought about because the railroad came through. It was the Whitefield and Jefferson Railroad that started in 1875 from Whitefield, New Hampshire. A different Brown company, no relation, somewhere maybe on the family tree, maybe, but they finally put the railroad through here, and so the Berlin Mills Company in Berlin, New Hampshire was able to bring the logging trains in and haul those logs out.
And that rail bed is right down there. You walk on it to get to
we
get up
were
here.
walking on it. Yeah. It's now a bike path and a snowmobile trail in the winter.
And when people are here, even in this area, and generally any of the hiking trails, most of the hiking trails in the White Mountains, this is what you're going to see. These 12 inches, 10 inches, that's generally the extent of it. So you're looking at a forest here that's 123 years old, generally in this area.
Right. Yeah, this is a little bit younger because this was cut a second time.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is probably more like 70 years old in here. Getting to be some big trees, but it's going to take some time.
The 12 inchers, 12, 14 are the 123-year-olds, right? That area?
Could be. I don't have my increment borer, but yeah. Yeah, there's some big trees that were left behind. You look at the tops of them; some of them are busted off, and those are probably some of the older trees.
I was in King Ravine this summer and I came down.
Yeah.
And I sent you some pictures. As a matter of fact, I have one of them, and I'll put it up here.
Okay.
Further up, when you cross the valleyway, and then you head west toward the King Ravine area.
Right.
Any one of those trails are in there. There's some really, really, really big trees in there, and I think those are older than. And we were chatting. Were they left as seed trees, or were they just older?
They could have been damaged, or they could have been hollow in some cases, and they just weren't merchantable for the logging operation at the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes some of these trees are so big that the horses or the oxen, they were too big to skid out. So
okay.
they left them.
Well, there's a few in there,
Yeah.
and like I said, I got a picture of
There
one
are,
of them.
yeah.
But generally speaking, as soon as you hit this area from the parking lot at Appalachian, you head all the way up. They're 12 inches, like I
Sure.
said, 14 of this. As you said, this was cut a second time, so it's a little bit smaller in here. That was news to me. So thanks for sharing that. But this is what, a larger beech here?
Yeah, it's a larger beech, and these are suffering from beech bark disease, combination of a scale insect that gets into the bark, and then a fungus comes in, and it gives you this kind of a warty appearance. Let's see, there's one right here. And you can see the white coming out here, but this warty or smallpox appearance is that beech bark disease.
Okay.
It will kill some of the trees, and some of the trees will survive. Some of them seem to be resistant to beech bark disease, but there's one right here that
This big one here?
yeah, that one has it, but it hasn't succumbed to it.
So if we go back shortly after 1906,
Yes.
so this is clear cut, and I had read in a number of different places whereby all the old trails were obliterated. They were gone. They were covered with slash.
They were covered with slash, yes.
And remember, this is mostly conifer forest back then.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's all down on the ground. All the branches are down.
Yeah.
And
it was probably more of a mix here in this along Snyder Brook, where it's colder. It's a cold air sink. Hemlock would tend to come in here, but this forest here was going to be. It would have had more spruce in it before it was cut. So it was probably a mixed northern hardwood spruce type, which is what is likely to grow here because it's a cold area. It's the north aspect of the mountain, but there'd be a lot of hardwoods that would be predominant.
I've got a couple of pictures we can put in here as well
Sure.
to show that.
Yeah.
Because we do have some pictures before the forest was logged. And
Yeah.
it seems to be a strip of red spruce further up.
Yeah,
that went across.
generally 2,700 feet in elevation. That's the magic number. Beyond that, it's pretty much all conifers with some heartleaf birch and some yellow birch that will be mixed in. But
Yeah.
the maples tend to fade out.
So shortly after the logging, the Randolph folks here banded together and started the Randolph Mountain Club with the goal of reblazing all the trails again, right?
Pretty much, yeah. That was one of their goals. And Randolph, even today, it's largely a population that comes here in the summertime. You know, they may live in Boston or other cities, and they come up here for the summer. Many of them are university professors and professionals in business, and they're the ones who basically started this Randolph Mountain Club, which is going strong today.
Sure is. It's great. It's great. And they maintain the trails. Obviously,
Yeah, they
some
have
of
a
the huts up
trail
here.
crew that they hire. They have cabins, and they have people that stay at the cabins.
You get the log
take care of
cabin.
them.
You got
The perch,
gray knob,
gray knob, and crag. Crag is my favorite.
Crag Camp.
Yeah, Crag Camp. Yeah, overlooking King Ravine.
Yeah. And just remember, it's a workout when people get in here.
Gray knob is insulated for winter camping. A lot better than Crag.
It's still cold.
Yeah.
It's still cold.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so if folks come up here, this is again a remarkable place. We know the history.
Yeah, and it's a great place to see the difference.
Exactly.
I mean, the type change is so dramatic that anyone will say, "Oh, that is so different." Those trees are so much bigger. They're twice as big, 3 times as big in the surrounding forest that's old growth.
Yep. And it's again a really easy opportunity just to walk into the woods here a little bit. Nobody's going to get lost.
Right.
And it's just a great way to appreciate the forest.
Yeah.
So so this is another adventure.
Yeah.
Love it, and we've got many more to come.
We do.
All right, David. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
For getting me out.
If you are planning a trip to the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a visit to Snyder Brook might be an interesting destination point. For those that seek adventure with elevation, a more rigorous hike awaits anyone who wishes to explore King Ravine and its surroundings. Informed of its past, it is hopeful that your visit will be more enjoyable and the connection to the mountains deeper and more personal. Plan accordingly, as any hike in the White Mountains that exceeds that of Snyder Brook requires fitness, knowledge of the area and trails, equipment, and a level of fitness commensurate with your hiking objectives, especially in winter. Areas above tree line are exposed to the full force of the weather, so paying attention to the forecast for any hike and at any time of the year is essential. At the beginning of nature's 12,000-year-old work in progress interrupted, 3 questions were presented. So we cut down all the trees in a 12,000-year-old ecosystem. What does that mean? Why should I care given the forest grew back? And how does that apply to me today? The answers to these questions are not entirely absolute. For the purpose of this docuseries, however, answers are provided in anticipation that we might consider them and their possible meaning for all of us. So what does it mean when we cut down all the trees in a 12,000-year-old ecosystem? To begin, the word sustainability is introduced. Without efforts to preserve the forest, the natural resource faces certain depletion until a new forest grows back over decades and even centuries. That means the forest is of no use to us in our immediate lives. Another answer is that the species makeup and distribution in the new forest is altered from its natural state, thus introducing possible weakness and vulnerability in the forest. Also, wildlife habitats are disrupted for decades, leading to species decline. In some cases, the disruption can lead to a total collapse if a given species cannot fully recover. The ecosystem collapses until a new one replaces it. Destroying an ecosystem is devastating to its inhabitants, regardless if they are wildlife, plant, or human. From a sentimental perspective, the aesthetic beauty of the forest is diminished for millennia as only one age class is present. Gone is the ancient artwork that the eye appreciates. Anyone who has experienced an old-growth forest will attest to its grandeur, look and feel, and wonder of a place on earth that is untouched by humanity. And one cannot forget that the actions of the logging era of the time not only harvested the forest, but they also harvested the future experiences of others who might value and appreciate the forest for its ancient serenity. That certain magic of the old forest, which only develops after many centuries with time as the artist, is stolen for lifetimes and countless people. The second question is, why should I care given that the forest grew back? While this question can be answered in a manner similar to the first question, there is a broader response. The original forest, which had a large population of softwood trees, is gone. In place of the expansive spruce, balsam, and hemlock tracts at lower elevations, the forest is now dominated by mostly deciduous trees such as beech, birch, and maple. If humans ever needed to replenish the stocks of lumber using softwood trees from northern New Hampshire, it would not be possible. Therefore, the wood needs to come from somewhere else. Today, the forests of the world still produce wood for a wide range of products. Some of it is grown via sustainable harvesting practices, yet some original forest is clear-cut. The net loss of forest globally stands at around 4.1 million hectares per year, or about 16,000 square miles. This translates into forest cover that is about 1.7 times the total area of New Hampshire every year. Why should one care given that the forest of northern New Hampshire has grown back? Because the wood industry is global in scope, and the overall natural resource worldwide is being consumed faster than it is being replenished, and that leads to eventual depletion and other consequences. The final question is, how does harvesting of a forest over 125 years ago apply to me today? The response to this question begins with a perspective, which is that the world's natural resources can and should be evaluated as a collective. Given that most raw materials are not organic and therefore finite as a natural resource, they will eventually be depleted given human consumption. It is likely that some will disappear within our lifetimes. And then what happens? For example, the Canarell oil complex in Mexico, which is an aging supergiant offshore oil field, is rapidly declining. Ultimately, this has an impact on global supplies of crude oil, with emphasis on the word global. The harvesting of the original forest in northern New Hampshire is relevant today because it reminds us that what happens here happens elsewhere. It forces us to look at the world's natural resources and ask a question that the lumbermen did not as they were harvesting the forest of northern New Hampshire in the late 1800s and early 1900s, which is, what happens to us when all the trees are harvested? If they had thought about it, then they would not have faced such an existential threat to their business endeavors. By broadening one's horizon to consider the future of other natural resources, the answer of why this applies to me is most obvious. Decreasing supplies of natural resources means changes to how humans live life.